So thank you all for making the time today again to come and see us and talk about the index a little bit more. Today's index webinar is about the questionnaire updates. I'll be taking you through that, and I've also got my colleagues Chloe and Imogen who are supporting me on the tech side. So the three of us will be taking you through this webinar. So great to see so many of you again this year interested in the index, but also signing up to this webinar and the webinar that we did a couple of weeks ago. It's great to see that you're also committed to the journey of social mobility and playing your part in it. So thank you for coming today. The plan initially was to kind of take us through the updates in more detail, but because we also have some new organizations joining us today, we will also be going through a little bit of what the index actually is. So we'll start the day by looking at who the SMF are and what we actually do. I'll take you briefly through how to actually enter the index and why you should do so. And then we'll go into the part that we're all really interested in, which is the updates to the 2024 index. As always, please feel free to use the chat option to put any questions in as we're going through this presentation. And there will also be a section at the end where you will have the opportunity to ask questions. So just to quickly remind ourselves, and just to make sure we're all on the same page, what actually is social mobility? So in the UK, we have low levels of social mobility, and we know that the workplace is just as important as the classroom for improving this. So entering the index can help you to be a part of a movement to improve social mobility in the UK and ensure that we have a more equitable society, as I think we all want to see. So a little bit about us, the SMF, so the Social Mobility Foundation. We're a national charity working across the UK to ensure that young people from all backgrounds have equitable access to higher education, career opportunities and progression. We do this in three ways. So we have three interventions. We work directly with the ambitious young people on our Aspiring Professionals program and support them in university and into their preferred career. Each year, we support around about 2,000 young people from across the program. And they are then supported with a professional mentor, work experience, and other opportunities to fulfill their ambitions. We're always looking for mentors, so if you're interested in any mentoring opportunities with us, then please feel free to reach out to us directly. We also, of course, run the index, which is why we're all here today, which is a benchmarking tool to support employers. And through our index and the advice that you get at the end of it, we help you ensure that you're inclusive to talent from all backgrounds and being drivers for actual change. And then lastly, we advocate and campaign for systemic change for social mobility. So we're ensuring we're breaking down the barriers for young people everywhere, and we campaign closely with them and alongside them. We also campaign to close the class pay gap and work with our young people to advocate and influence government and policymakers. So what is the Social Mobility Index and why should you enter? So like I said before, it's a benchmarking tool and it will help you as an employer to recruit, progress and retain the best staff. Whether you're at the beginning of your journey or more advanced or are a more advanced entrance, so I know a lot of you on this call will be, the index is the right thing to do at any point in time. The main thing is that you receive a detailed feedback report, which is going to outline where you're performing well and where you're doing less well, and crucially, how you can actually tangibly make these improvements. So employers consistently tell us that the real value here is the guidance in helping them shape a social mobility strategy and plan going forward, and being able to engage colleagues and senior stakeholders in doing that. We know that a lot of you will be either at the beginning of your journey or you're a bit nervous about how you've performed this year. You're always able to enter the index anonymously, and you would still receive the same level of support, the same level of feedback as everyone else, sorry. What all it would mean is that we wouldn't talk about your entry externally, and it might give you that opportunity and the chance to see where you are with your journey on social mobility and have an actual starting point. The other part that we get asked a lot about is the sections and questions. So you don't actually have to answer all of the sections and all of the questions. You just need to answer at least one of the sections and as many questions as you possibly can. But just to say, don't let that deter you. Be picky and mindful of the areas that you would like specific feedback on if you are nervous about this area. I hope this is just a good reminder of what the index actually is. And if you'd like to see the presentation again, we actually have a link to it and we can send the recording to you directly. So the process of entering the index this year. So make sure that you register on our website as soon as possible so that you're included on all of the updates on the index, which include the entrant pack, but also crucially, once the index opens, the actual link to making your submission. The index will open on the 12th of March at 9 a.m. this year. And you will be given a link to the online portal where you will be making your submission. And then we finish the index on the 7th of June at midnight. So you'll have 3 months. Normally, we do tend to extend the deadline, but this year, just listen up, we definitely won't be doing that. So please put that date into your diaries and remember that the 7th of June is the hard deadline for completing the index. You will have received a link to Alchema, which is our online surveying platform, and you'll also beforehand have received the entrant pack, which includes the guidance notes for the index, the questions that we're asking this year, as well as the contract for entering. In September, you'll receive your individual feedback report with your ranking, and we will then also be able to know if you still want to be anonymous or not. And then in October or November, we will be publishing the top 75 and the key findings report. So that's a brief overview of the process of entering. And then just a little bit about the entrant fee. So in 2023, we introduced a charge for entering the index, which helped us to ensure that we can continue to invest in developing our advice. And as a charity, it helps us to also cover our costs. Due to the volume of entrants from certain sectors, we're also able to produce additional sectoral analysis. So it's been really great to have this entrant fee at this point in time to be able to help us to do more with the data that we receive. So the entrant fee is £1,200 plus VAT. And there are a number of exemptions, which include small businesses and charities. And the additional sector analysis insights are available for the banking sector, law, and professional services. So through your continued engagement and investment in the index, we've also been able to make updates throughout the index, but also crucially have been able to include a new payment method. So after feedback from previous entrants, we know that being able to pay by credit card is something that entrants and organizations have found useful. So we've introduced that method for you to be able to make your payment for the index this year. This leads me on to the juicy part of this webinar, and that is what changes have we made and what updates are there for the index this year. So the first thing to say is that this is an evolution, not a revolution. We just wanted to make sure that you know that, yes, we've made some changes and updates alongside best practice advice, but it's not a complete overhaul of the index. This is not meant to be completely different. It is very similar, and I'll take you through the key updates this year. We wanted to make changes that are based on your feedback and are also designed to bring simplicity to the process as a whole and ensure we're accurately assessing the positive impact your organization is making on social mobility. So one of the first things we've done is to just update the index as usual to align with best practice. Key here is that we're moving away from cold spots in line with the Social Mobility Commission. So we'll be asking about what range of measures you use to target schools or younger people in your outreach activity, and in turn, our advice will be less focused or no longer focused on cold spots as it has been in the past. Another area is about hybrid working, and as that's the new norm at the moment, we're asking more about whether you as an organization are considering the implications of this on social mobility. And then we're also continuing on questions on the cost of living crisis and also emerging trends such as AI and the impact on recruitment and specifically on social mobility. Secondly, we have a tighter focus on evidencing outcomes and impact and not just sharing the practice. So we're seeking really clear evidence on the impact of your interventions and the outcomes of those interventions. And we'd really strongly encourage you to share plans in place where something is new or an initiative which is still in its infancy. Just ensure that you've got the proof or are able to evidence to us that this is a pipeline plan. We've also made greater emphasis on progression culture and advocacy. So the social mobility space, especially for a lot of you that have been in it for some time, has matured quite a lot from where it was, even from the moment that the index started up 8 years ago. So we've updated it to reflect that really. So there's increased questions around progression to reflect the development in this space. And we've also split advocacy into two sections to reflect internal and external activity and allow for more innovative practice to be evidenced by you. This is especially from feedback from our organizations that have entered in the past. We've removed the employee survey, recognizing that employers often already run an annual diversity survey, and that employees in your organization may be experiencing survey fatigue. So we will still be asking you to share insights from your own surveys from a social mobility perspective, but this will be throughout the sections in the index, and especially in the data collection section. And we really want to know what they tell you about your employees' experience and culture and how you're acting on the responses that you receive from these surveys. And then lastly, on data collection, so we just wanted to make really clear that there is no change or no significant change to new data collection requests. It's all very much the standard things that we've asked for in the past. There might be a slight difference in the way that we word it, but there's no significant difference to the type of data that we need collecting. So after feedback from entrants, we've also checked about the historical data that we're asking about. And this year, we've introduced that we will only be asking for three previous years data sets, if you have those, for us to be able to establish a trend. So hopefully that will make the process a lot smoother for you. And we've used your feedback as well as the research we've been doing to help us to come to these conclusions. So those who are very familiar with the index will note a change to the sections. Like I said, it's not a huge change though, but there is a slight change. So it's still looking at, what we've done is we've made sure that the index is looking at the employment cycle from the perspective of the young person. And then we've restructured it to 8 assessed sections, as well as the organizational data at the beginning. So I'll be going through them now. So if you look at the sections, as I said, we've got 8 sections in total. In the first section, schools outreach and work with young people, we're looking at how effectively employers target young people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and whether employer outreach provides accessible routes into their profession for those with an interest and aptitude. So the index will reward employers who are moving towards well-targeted and well-evaluated employability programs that are accessible to all. And just as a reminder, this is where we've moved away from cold spots in alignment with the S&C, as these are now part of a basket of measures as opposed to just the main one. In section 2, we've got attraction and university outreach. Here we're looking at considering the extent to which organizations recruit graduates, apprentices, and school leavers to attract a diverse range of applicants and make opportunities accessible to everyone. The index will reward employers that make an effort to diversify their attraction methods, ensuring that they reach those from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And we are aware that normally we talk a lot about Russell Group versus non-Russell Group within this area, and it's staunchly debated. So we know through research that organizations and universities, especially in the Russell Group, are doing a lot to diversify their intake, the student intake, but we're not at that stage yet. So therefore we still would recommend against it. But just to say, we have a more nuanced outlook on this and have been able to do the research and are able to give advice based upon that nuance in the feedback report. Section 3, which is recruitment and selection, we're examining the recruitment and selection processes that are too often rewarding polish over potential. So that is looking at things like accent, appearance, or behaviors that are commonly associated with applicants from privileged backgrounds. The best performing employers in the index engage in 2 categories of action. And the first one is removing barriers that prevent individuals from lower socioeconomic backgrounds from progressing to selection. And then the second one is being able to reward current ability and future potential over past academic performance. We then, I'm so sorry. We then have routes into the employer, which is section 4. And here we're looking at the steps that the employers are making to create well-structured routes into your organizations. Employers who perform really well here are able to target all entry routes to people from low socioeconomic backgrounds and are hiring based on potential and pay fairly for the routes into their organization. Section 5 is data collection. So as we said, data collection will be throughout the index as a whole anyway, but we also have a data collection section on its own. And here we're examining how employers collect and analyze data to understand their workforce's socioeconomic profile. Here we recognize companies that collect data rigorously, analyze it, and then actually use their insights to give them an idea on how to improve their socioeconomic diversity. Section 6 is pay progression and retention. So social mobility is not just about individuals from lower socioeconomic backgrounds actually entering a high paid career. It's also about them being able to flourish and progress at the same rates as their peers. Here we're exploring especially the financial security in roles and the support provided to employees to progress in their careers. Employers who perform really well in this section will have explored the impact of socioeconomic background on pay, progression, and retention, and will have implemented support to employees from low socioeconomic backgrounds to allow them to actually thrive. So as I've said before, here's where we've probably put a few more questions than we had done in the past, just to ensure that there is parity between the different sections. In section 7, we examine the strategies undertaken to create an inclusive workplace culture and the work going on within the organization to support employees from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So the employers who tend to perform well in this section will have undertaken a robust exercise to understand the experiences of people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. They will also have senior buy-in for social mobility strategies and will also set targets to improve their socioeconomic diversity. And finally, we've got external advocacy. And here we're looking at the external work that organizations are doing to improve social mobility. So those performing highly in this section are the employers who leverage their influence and encourage external stakeholders as well as their peers to act on social mobility. So those are the 8 sections that we'll be looking at in the index this year. We thought that you might have some key questions and we thought we'd put them on one slide so that we can answer those now. So the 5 questions that we kind of pulled out that we thought you might ask would be, when does the index open and close? So 12th of March, 9 a.m. is when the index will be open for submissions. And then the 7th of June at 23:59 or midnight is when the index will be closing. So when will the questionnaire be made available? So we're currently working on the entrant pack, and that should be with you in the next couple of weeks, but definitely before the index opens. So just make sure that you've registered on the website to make sure that goes directly to you. How do you make the payment for the index? So you'll be able to pay via credit card once you make your submission on the index at the last stage. And we will also have a section within the organizational data at the beginning for your finance contact, who we will be contacting for anything about finance. So what if you want to share your employee survey with us anyway? Like we said, we're not actually asking the question on the employee survey this year, but there will be questions around the employee survey or the kind of things that we would put in an employee survey in the index itself. So you will have a chance to evidence that at that point. And then finally, how do you prepare your colleagues for filling in the index? Number one, and especially for you, organizations that have done it quite a few times, I think you do it early. Probably once you come off this course, start getting all of the people that you think that you need together, let them know the timelines, but engage with the same teams as you always have done in the past. There's not really a change in the teams that you might want to engage if you're a larger organization, and if you're a smaller organization, the data sets aren't that different to what we normally would ask. So just start early and make sure that you utilize asking us questions when you have the opportunity. That's it from me and going through the presentation. I'm going to open it up to Imogen, who's going to go through the questions that are being asked in the chat.
Hi, yes. We have quite a few questions in the chat to go through. But the first one, and probably one of the most common ones, is once you've registered on the website, when do you expect to receive the entrant pack?
Yes, so that will be in the next couple of weeks, but definitely before the index opens.
Thank you. And there's a couple of questions around if you still want to pay by invoice, are you still able to do this?
Yes, so you are able to do it. There is an option. Again, if you want to do the credit card payment, you can do it directly on the Alchema link or through Alchema. If you would like to do it by invoice, then there's an option to click on that and we'll raise one.
That's really useful to know. One of the other questions we've got more around the content of the index is, can we give more guidance on what the basket of measures alternatively to cold spots are and what other things we'll be looking for?
Yeah. So when it comes to the basket of measures, there's a few measures that we look at when it comes to, I'm sorry, when it comes to areas of deprivation. We've got a link from the SMC that we can share in the chat that will be more detailed on what the measures actually are. But if you look at the State of the Nation report, for example, it will also give you the evidence of that. And within the guidance document, we also have set it out.
Thank you. Some other questions we've got is whether or not even with these new sections, will there still be a focus on experienced hires, or is there any additional information or questions we now ask about experienced hires?
Yes, so that's still within the progression section. So experienced hires, rather than taking out their experience, it's just putting it within the progression pay section of the index this year.
Thank you. So we've got quite a few questions coming in, so I'm going to try and group some of them together. But we've got some questions around what evidence are we particularly looking for? So how does this differ from previous years, or does this differ?
It doesn't differ that highly in terms of when it comes to the evidence that we're looking for. It's as long as it's focused on furthering social mobility within your organization. The questions are completely varied depending on the section. So I can't give you a complete idea of what the evidence is, but all you need to bear in mind is when you do give the evidence for the question, put it from a social mobility lens. And like I said before, the questions aren't massively different. There's just a change in sort of focus in some of the areas according to best practice advice. And we do this every single year. But we just had the opportunity to actually have this webinar this year to kind of talk through some of the greater things before you receive the questions.
That's really great. So there's been a couple of other questions as well about what exactly is in the entrant pack. And will it be evident in the entrant pack what is significantly different from previous years?
So the engine pack includes, well, 4 documents, but 3 main documents. You've got the guidance notes, which will help you to make your submission and gives you kind of advice. We've also got a key in there, so like a jargon buster to kind of help you understand the different terminologies and sort of the purpose of the index. Then you've got the questionnaire in PDF form and in Word version form. The PDF and Word version questionnaire is the same as the Alchema link. Crucial, you must make your submission through the Alchema link. We can't take a submission from any other source, but it basically just outlines all of the questions that we have in the index and gives you the opportunity to look at it before the index opens, or also share it with your teams or anyone else that might need to give any sort of evidence or data to you to help you make a submission. And then we've got the contract, which kind of outlines what is included for entering the index this year.
That's really great to know what's in the entrant pack, because there were a few questions about that. There's some other questions here about outreach. So there's a few questions around what does good outreach look like? Is it better to look at more schools, or is it more important to build better relationships with a smaller number of schools? And then kind of another question to tack onto that is, because we're only recently moving away from cold spots and you submit based on your last financial kind of academic or calendar year, will that still be taken into account when we're marking? So will that be allowed for?
Well, when it comes to quantity versus quality, I think you'll know what the answer is. It's definitely quality. We don't, number one, your submissions are always taken into consideration and context of the size of your organization, where you're based, what kind of outreach activity you realistically can do. So we don't think it's important for you to be able to evidence that you've seen 20 different schools if you're not actually having there's not the desired outcome, or you're not able to actually do what you're trying to do in furthering social mobility. It's better for you to focus on quality outreach rather than quantity of outreach. When it comes to the cold spots and mark scheme, so obviously the mark scheme is secret and we won't be sharing that, but just know that if we will be taking into consideration what you have been doing, and you'll have a chance within the submission to also write in words what you've done, why you've done it, and we're able to mark against that.
Thank you. And I think that's the most important thing, is to focus on outcomes from your outreach. So as long as you're evidencing the outcomes from your outreach, that's really important. We've had a question around what is good external advocacy, and how would we see that? What would be a good example of external advocacy?
It's a great question. I think there's quite a few examples. I think it depends, again, on how big or small you are. But when we look at examples of advocacy, we're looking at, are you speaking loudly and proudly about your work within social mobility, whether that be on social media or within the contracts that you sign with your supply chain? Are you doing things like measuring the class pay gap and speaking about that openly? Do you have targets in place? When it comes to external advocacy, it does depend on the amount of resource you can put in, but it's also about that sustained advocacy at all times, continuously staying engaged with the process and the topic. But I can't say exactly what good looks like or what it doesn't, but these are some examples. And if you wanted to know more, then read the key findings report. So there's some really good examples within that, and that's on our website. And you can do registration for the index at the same time.
That's really great. One of the other questions we've got is more around the practicality of entering the index. So if we were to say, how long do you think it takes an organization to fully complete the questionnaire? Is it 2 days or 5 days or a week, or yeah, so how long would we say you should dedicate to filling out the index?
I think it depends on the structure of your organization, but if you have everything in a row from previous index entrant feedback, what we know is the first month is basically used to information gather. You start getting your different teams around. You might create a working group if that works for you. And once you have the copy of the questionnaire, you're able to see what teams you need to engage, what data sets you need to look for. So the first month tends to be just a data gathering exercise, where all of the different bits of information to fill out the index are being gathered. Then we would say the second month normally tends to be someone is starting to fill out the survey online. You are able to share the survey with different people within your organization. So you can actually send a link to different people in the organization to fill out different sections if you'd like them to. And then the final month is kind of used to get senior stakeholder sign off to ensure that it's all in line within your organization's strategy, if it's okay from a senior point of view. Again, it depends on your organization, the way that you are structured, but leave as much time as possible, because again, we won't be extending the closing date this year. So by the 7th of June, it will be done. I would also say utilize all of the different bits within the entrant pack. So share that ahead of time and get everyone to kind of get on board on that with that. But it does tend to take a lot of time. If you don't have the resource, again, you can choose the different sections that you would like to enter into. You don't have to answer all of the sections, and you don't have to answer all of the questions. You would still get advice in line with best practice in the sections that you didn't manage to finish.
Thank you. There was a couple of questions here around regional impact. So is there anything kind of implemented to account for regional differences, particularly for Scottish context? And another question as well is around, if not measuring cold spots, is there anything more around kind of the regional, if you don't have a national presence, how are we marking based on kind of cold spot support for employers who don't have a national presence?
Yeah, so we've always been interested sort of like from the four nation approach when it comes to the index. At the beginning of your submission in the organizational data, you'll say where your organization is based and where you have offices. So your organization's submission is taken into the context of what region you are present in. So we have also been working a lot this year on making sure that we have advice, especially in the other areas that are not England, because we know there is so much more that we can do and we have been doing. So we are able to kind of, when we do write your feedback reports, we can look at where you're based and we give advice based on the context of where you are based. And then when it comes to if you only have a regional presence, that's where your outcomes are really important when you write your submission. So again, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. If you're able to evidence to us the work that you're doing and then the outcomes that you're having, that's basically what we're looking at. I'm trying not to give away the mark scheme whilst I'm speaking.
On the back of that question as well, we have a question around global presence. So will your global activity be taken into account? So if you can evidence work that you've done for social mobility in a global context, is that taken into account within the index?
That's a great question. Unfortunately not. The index is very much Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland. But if you have examples for anything that you're doing, we definitely want to know about it.
Thank you. We have another question that's around preparing for the index. So before we do the official launch and once organisations have received the questions, is it worth organisations trying to prep information based on last year's questions, or is it just worth waiting until they receive the entrant pack before they do it? Because preparing for different staff availabilities to fill in the index.
I think it's a good idea to already start sort of looking at last year's data sets that we asked for. Again, it's not completely different, the index this year. It's slight different structure and a few different questions, but the same teams will be needed to kind of make your submission. So definitely have a look at what we did last year. And I was actually going to point out to this at the end, but I know some of you will want to see your your submissions from last year. So if you needed that shared, we can also do it. But just bear in mind that there might be some questions that are in a different place or worded slightly differently. But it's the same teams and the same kind of data sets included. So if you can already start getting your teams prepared, we'd recommend doing it.
Okay, perfect. So we have a couple more questions now around outreach and cold spots. I think it's an area that lots of people are asking about. So are we able to explain in a bit more detail what we will be marking against in outreach if we're not focusing on cold spots? And for example, is work with further education colleges and access to young people through youth work organisations also marked for in the index?
So the first part was about cold spots and how we're marking against that. I can't give away exactly how we're marking against, of course, but there's a measure, there's a few measures on how that's measured in general. I'll be able to share that with you at the end of this call, but I don't want to get it wrong in this call and then advise differently. So we will be able to share that at the end and we'll put it into the email, which will include the recording. And then what was the second question? Sorry, Imogen.
The other question was around further education colleges and access to young people through youth work organisations, and is that still recorded for in the index?
Yes, it is. So if it's those from under 18 and under, then that's in the outreach activity. So all of the work that you're doing with different initiatives or partnerships that you have, please do include that if that is relevant to social mobility. And then again, within attraction activity and university outreach, if there's anything that is also relevant from a social mobility standpoint, we still want to hear about it. So it's not just about the work that you're doing independently, it's also if you're doing it in conjunction with other organizations, definitely put that in there.
Thank you. I suppose on the cold spots thing as well, we're particularly focused on outcomes, and organisations might use other measures such as the index of multiple deprivation as ways in which to target young people. So that's one of the examples of things that we're now kind of allowing employers to tell us about in the index that we weren't previously asking about in previous years. So hopefully that helps as well. We've had another question as well around AI and hybrid working. Are we able to share any research which would highlight best practice in terms of social mobility for AI and hybrid working?
So these are very new spaces. So there might be some resources that we may be able to gather and share with you on what we know so far. But again, because it is so new, we haven't got anything right now to hand to share with you. But we will take that on board and we'll have a look at what we can do. But when it comes to answering those kind of questions within the index, one, there's not a massive focus on it. It's just kind of understanding what you as organizations are doing at this point to help make sure that social mobility is also taken into consideration when looking at hybrid working, for example, or AI. But it also gives you the opportunity to kind of tell us about innovative things that you're doing in this space that we might not have asked for in the past. So we will have a look if we can find something that we can share with you. But again, the space is really quite fresh and new. So we're really interested in finding out what you're already doing.
Thank you, Diddy. Another question here is around, do we provide a guideline on completing the questions, as some of the questions might be open to interpretation, and they don't want to have their answers affected by whether or not they've interpreted the question in the right way?
Yeah, that's a good question. So hopefully the guidance notes, which are also updated, will help in that. If not, with throughout making your submissions, you're always free to ask us any questions that you have. And if not, sorry, if you have any questions, you can get in touch with us directly and send us an email. We're also looking into doing some drop-in sessions throughout the index cycle. So more news on that later on. But if there are particular questions, you might be able to save that for a drop-in session and ask those questions directly. We also do due diligence at the end of the index cycle. So once the index closes, we look at the submission as a whole. If there's any sort of holes or anything that we're not sure about, we'll get back in touch with you.
Perfect. And so we just actually have one more question in the chat. We've managed to get through quite a lot of them. But what is the final date for submission? Is just the last question we've got. So a nice one to finish with.
That's a great question to finish on. It's the 7th of June at 23:59. Midnight to some, but 23:59 is the end of the submissions. And the start is the 12th of March.
Perfect. We don't seem to have any more questions. I'm not sure if anyone else is putting anything in the chat at the moment, but for the moment, that is all the questions answered.
Okay, perfect. If there are any other questions at any point in time, do feel free to kind of email us directly and we'll hope to answer those questions as soon as possible for you. So just to finish this off then and to look at the next steps. First of all, I hope that this has reassured you that the changes are not as extensive as you might have first thought. We just want to make sure that you have sort of all of the information that you need beforehand. So the entrant packs will be coming, but we hope that this webinar has been useful for you to be able to have an idea of the kind of areas we're looking for this year. So as I've already mentioned in the Q&A, but we know that it's useful to some of you to have your old submissions to fill out your new one. It's still useful to do that. So if you don't have it, let us know and we can send that directly to you. And just a reminder to give as much data as possible, especially focusing on outcomes where possible. Just don't let perfect be the enemy of good, because you should start from somewhere, even if you don't think you've got all of your ducks in a row. So the next steps are to register on our website, and you'll receive your entrant pack in the next couple of weeks. Then make sure that you read through the entrant pack and engage the internal stakeholders that you need to be able to make your submission. And lastly, and crucially, announce your entry externally using the advocacy packs, which are also included in there in that email. So I hope this has been useful. If you have any other additional questions or need any help with your submissions, just get in touch with us directly. And yeah, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, everyone.